Cool. Would you prefer me to have this because I'm from Melbourne? Right. So honestly, thank you so much for having me. If it wasn't for the crap going on, I'd be with you in person today, but not allowed to leave my state, let alone country. But just want to say well done to all the organisers. To put on a physical conference in 2020 is some going. So well done. Um, so today, hopefully, the idea is I'm going to help you progress your security career. So who am I? So I'm Ricky Burke. I run a security recruitment company based out of Melbourne. I like to do lots of stuff in the community. So as I said, if it wasn't for crap going on, I'd be with you today. So I love going to conferences and been to New Zealand for KiwiCon. I've been involved in presentations and workshops at various stuff in Australia from besides Melbourne and Canberra and Perth, etc. I host a podcast called Hacking into Security, and Tony James has been involved. So thank you, Tony. It's not a shameless plug for the podcast, but you're welcome to listen to it if you get a chance at some point. And then done a bunch of other stuff that hopefully gives me a bit of credibility to actually talk about the industry. So today, talking about the podcast that I host, and again, I'm not trying to sell it to you, but we're going to cover some stories. So in this podcast, I've spoke to some incredible people, including Tony. But I've spoken to people like Steve Katz, the world's first ever CISO, red teamers, purple teamers, researchers, people that have run businesses and all sorts of really amazing stories. And I think what's really helpful is learning from others and the ability to hear those stories, maybe get some advice. And there's four particular people who I'm going to highlight who we'll be covering today. So Mark Bown. Mark's the CISO for Afterpay. If you don't know Afterpay, they're a pretty fast-growing Australian fintech type company. Casey Ellis, who a lot of people may know through Bugcrowd. Louis from Pentester Lab, and a lady over in the US called Chloe Mustaghi. And she comes from, again, a very different type of background. All different stories. And there's a few more tips in there as well. But these four in particular, I want to highlight because I think, again, valuable things that other people can learn from their journeys and their advice. So the first is pen tester to CISO. And this story really interests me because my experience is predominantly Australia. And in Australia, most CISOs do not come from a technical background, let alone pen testers. He may be literally one of two, three max people that come from that sort of background in Australia, operating at that sort of level these days. And through my role, I get to speak to lots of amazing people that do have aspirations to grow in their careers. And some people do want to go on and do more, and some would like to become a CISO one day. And we traditionally see a lot of CISOs come from more of a sort of risk and GRC type background. And I think it's helpful to learn from people like Mark and how he's done it and other people as well. So how did Mark become a CISO? So early in his career, started out as a pen tester, eventually got some experience doing a bit of incident handling, incident response. Then he went on to manage both offensive and defensive teams. So he got some really good exposure to both sides. He worked internationally and then basically got exposure to both the consultancy side and then internal as well. So through those sort of changes, through those moves, he got to see a lot of things and understand things from different perspectives. So his main learns along the way is, again, sometimes you can get a bit lucky depending on where you land in terms of company and environments. But the things that really helped him is in his first roles, he really worked with some talented people. And in your first job or your job, you may be the only security person. Maybe it's a really small team, but a really helpful thing that he recommends is trying to surround yourself with talented people. And the more you can do that, the more you can learn from them. And whether they're mentors, whether they're friends, whether they're just people you collaborate with, it can only help your career. Early on, he was able to earn or learn, I should say, from his perspective, sort of the security principles of the industry. So it's not just technical things, but really understanding problems understanding risk and how we can use technology to actually solve that. Taking opportunities was really important to him too. And so, really early in his career, he went from Australia, working globally over in the UK and working on some really big scale problems. And this gave him really good exposure for his future career. So, a little bit hard to do it these days in terms of international travel and stuff, but just taking opportunities as they come. So, whether it's internal, external, being open to opportunities, I think is really important. So again, in my sort of role, I speak to a lot of people, and I do find most people are actually open-minded, but there's some people that maybe are very closed. And again, everyone's got different situations, but maybe not so open-minded. And I think this is not me trying to sell anything, but just I think being open-minded just lets you know what else is out there, because you never know whether it's a better opportunity, better company, whether it's just knowing that where you are is actually the best place for you to be right now. Just being aware of what's out there is a really helpful thing. Also, the balance of consultancy and internal, so getting exposure to both sides. So the benefit of consultancy, especially early in the career, was broad exposure to lots of different things. So different problems, short-term deadlines, and all sorts of things. But then flipping that and working internally gave a really different view on the industry, even though you're working in the same sort of roles, but understanding how things operate, how it takes in terms of sort of influence of working and collaborating internally, and actually how to get things done in a sort of bigger picture point of view. And then if you want to be a CISO, is understand, do you actually want to be one? So a lot of people say they want to do something, but they don't always know what it looks like. And he actually joked and laughed, sort of said it 2 or 3 times about, are you really sure you want to do this? And it's because, again, it's the unknowns. So some simple advice there is sort of reaching out to people. So you could literally, whatever role you want to work in, whether it's a CISO, whether it's something else, it's find people on LinkedIn, find people at the conference or whatever that sort of title or job function you want to be in. And you can get some background on what it actually looks like in that job on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis. Because on the outside, something might seem amazing or that's what you aspire to be. On the inside, it could be pretty shit. It could be the sort of stress that you don't want to deal with. So just being aware of those things can be really helpful. And 4 key things he mentioned about sort of, do you actually enjoy these things, is one around mentoring. So mentoring junior people being really important for him in his career and how he's sort of helped grow people and what he does today. Thinking about problems on a multi-year scale. So when we're in sort of more individual contributor type roles, so whether you're a pen tester or incident responder or a GRC consultant or whatever it is, you're sort of tracking on and looking at the sort of the immediate problem. You're not thinking about multi-year strategies and situations, and trying to look at the big picture is, I guess, what people, the more senior you go, are looking at. So that ability to sort of think at big problems on a multi-year way is how you'd be operating in that sort of position. So the more you can do that in your role and how things can impact and have knock-on effects is a really good way to think. Influence is massive. So being able to influence an organization. So again, starting early in your career and then sort of moving upwards, the more influence you can have, the better. And how you do that is by, I guess, whether it's tricking people into doing the right thing as the way he says it, or again, sort of just helping people understand things from their perspective. But influence is massive. So whether you're influencing a developer to make some small change based on sort of code review that you're doing, or whether it's influencing strategy, the more you can do that, communicate and help change things, the more effective you can be. And then exposure to the non-security side of security. So meaning that, yes, security as a AppSec person or as an incident responder or as a threat intel person, you would talk really differently than you would to someone who's not in IT or someone who's sort of in IT but in a different function. So just trying to basically put yourself in their position. How can you help these other people in an organization understand what you're doing, and basically how can you help them and maybe again influence that change? And then these are specific things that again he said he recommends. So what was really helpful: consultancy experience, getting sort of broad understanding, internal experience, getting to see how grueling it actually is to sort of make these changes in an organization. So it's one thing recommending something as a sort of external party. It's another thing actually getting the organization to actually make these changes. And then what was helpful was starting in pen testing, going over to the blue team side, and then building out his awareness and building out his experience. And then as a manager, you need a network of people. So whether that is actually hiring people, but also talking to other people in your space, bouncing off ideas and taking some learns of sort of how other people have done certain things or gone through certain situations, learning from them. So the bigger your network, and again, we're at a conference today, or at least you guys are in person, um, the more you can do that, and it's only going to help your career. And then finding opportunities in your current role. So you don't always have to sort of move up or even move away from a business to get the experience you're looking for. And to be honest, you can take this advice here, particularly sort of the leadership roles, but also for other roles as well. But these particular things around, again, if you want to be a CISO, is understanding the budgeting process, understanding financials, understanding how to communicate to a board, and basically when the shit hits the fan and there is an incident, is how to handle those things. So trying to get experience in those sort of ways, but taking that advice again and putting a different perspective on it is, if you're someone who wants to, let's say, get into security from another part of IT or even something else in business, again, you might be a developer and you want to work in security, is there's an amazing amount of skills that you can bring to the industry, but there's also things you can do in your role to add security into it as well. So you don't always have to get experience in security. In security, you can get it in your role. And I think a lot of people sort of don't always think about those things. And the more you can bring it into your position, and I particularly remember Brendan Syrup, so Sparkle Ops, used to bring security into his role as a QA. And as far as he was concerned, security should be part of QA anyway. And people notice those things, and then you get opportunities. Next thing is entrepreneurship. So again, spoke to some really cool people like Casey, and I really like his sort of definition of a founder is, yeah, basically you need some challenges to solve. And I guess these are the key things I've picked up from him and from others along the way. If you want to start a business, one of the most important things is a why. Why are you doing this thing in the first place? Is what is your mission? So what problems are you trying to change, or what problems are you trying to solve? Be aware that it's going to be bloody tough, especially if you're doing certain things like category creation. So that was one of the things that Casey had on his plate, is bug bounties weren't really a thing when they started Bugcrowd. So trying to communicate something to an industry, to the people actually in security, to the basically potential customers, and then the sort of broader community, there's been a sort of pathway of doing that. And that's not easy. And sometimes these things, timing is very important, because you might have the right problem you're working on, but maybe you're too early. Or the other way is you're too late and you're playing catch up. And again, if you're starting a business, that mission of why you're doing it is massive. And also, some things can take time. So really, really good example, I think, is Louis Niedfiger with Pentester Lab. So Pentester Lab, if you're particularly in the sort of hacking community, and basically you'd probably know Pentester Lab. But it's not been a sort of overnight success for him. So he started this business quite a while ago, and it was 7 years before he actually quit his job full time to go and run Pentester Lab full time. And even the first time he tried a paid version of it, it was not successful. But he took his learnings from that, and then over time was able to sort of refine things and put out a version of the organization that basically it is now. But again, it's taken time. It took a lot of effort over a long period of time. I remember speaking with him after a conference a couple of years back, and he was telling me sort of it was literally evenings, weekends, every week. And that's a lot of hours when you're working full time and you've got a family as well. So that's a lot of things to have on your plate. So when starting a business, really, again, it goes back to that why. What is the mission? And you need to be massively passionate about what you're doing, because if it's more about money, and of course money is important because we've got to pay bills and stuff, but if that's the driver, then it's not going to see you through those evenings and those weekends and those tough times, because there will be tough times. But if you're genuinely interested and passionate about what you do, that's going to thing that will drive you through those tougher times. And again, if you've running a business and you're putting all the hours in, and like him, where again, as far as he was concerned, he failed the first time and then he sort of made some changes and then was successful. But if he wasn't passionate about it, he couldn't have put the hours in. He couldn't have kept going through, again, sort of ups and downs. And what was quite interesting is another learn from him is he thinks that he waited too long. And it's a nice problem to have because he was working at Fitbit as a remote security engineer for them. So I don't know the specifics, but I'd imagine if you're working remote from the US for a US tech company, then you're probably well compensated. So there's that to balance in terms of taking that risk of quitting your full-time job to go and do something that you are passionate about. But that's the other thing to balance as well, is how long do you give something in terms of the up and running, and then once you are successful, when do you make the big jump? So just, again, things to be aware of. And then the last person, and definitely not meaning the least person, but I think it's a great story here, is around Chloe. So creating opportunities. So Chloe Mustaghi, really amazing person who I sort of bumped into on a Bug Crowd event earlier this year. And she's literally taken over my social media feeds on LinkedIn and everywhere else. Very, very busy lady. And what's crazy is she wasn't even in security 3 years ago. So currently today, if you look at her profile, very impressive. She's vice president of strategy for Point 3 Security, a US security consultancy. Her basically function is marketing, but a hell of a lot more than that. But that's her background. So she's a massive sort of, she calls herself an InfoSec advocate and activist. She's spoken at over 50 events this year, DEF CON, B-Sides, and loads of other things. And it's crazy when you look at her personal website, how much stuff she's got going on. And what's really interesting is two things here. Is one, we have an issue, which I wouldn't say is totally addressed yet, but I think hopefully is improving. And that's around sort of the diversity and effectively just the whole issue of being, you know, an industry that's traditionally been sort of older white dudes. And there is some improvements happening, but she nearly walked away from the industry. So if we go her profile today of, you know, very active in the industry, sharing lots of amazing content, helping so many people, we as an industry nearly lost her a couple of years ago. So she was at a conference, I think it was RSA, but don't hold me to that, but basically over in the US, and she was really put off by the event. Some other things happened to her. I'm not sure if it was that or maybe a different conference. Basically, some real negative stuff and real sort of sleaze bag things happening, which unfortunately we do hear about from time to time. And on the back of these things, she felt so uncomfortable that she wanted to walk away from the industry and actually started applying for other jobs. Fortunately for her and the industry, she went to another conference that was a lot more inclusive, and then she sort of built relationships and felt a lot more comfortable, and then has gone on to do some really cool stuff since then. And I think, again, from 2-3 years ago, the industry's improving, but still, again, a lot more work to do. But just goes to show, and I'm sure she's not the only one that potentially has nearly walked away or has walked away from the industry because of just, you know, negative stuff and lack of different things or just bad attitudes. And I think hopefully, again, it's just, I think it's good to be aware of these things, and hopefully we can work on addressing those. But what I like about Chloe's background is, you know, she's very influential. She's, again, speaking at all these amazing conferences like DEF CON and other places, and she doesn't even come from a technical background. So she only got into security through a recruiter, of all people. So she was working in marketing for a tech company. She was approached by a recruiter to say, hey, do you want to apply for this role at a security company doing some marketing? She said, yeah, sure, why not? And she's not one of those people that, to be honest with you, sometimes I say, you know, you need to be passionate about getting security to get into security. sometimes it's, you're the right place, the right time, or the right company. But she had this, I guess, set of skills. She had this attitude that just really worked well with what she was doing, and then obviously has gone on to do good things since then. But what's good is, she's got, again, appreciation of the technical side of things, but she's not a pen tester. She's not an incident responder. She's not an AppSec engineer. She's still using her marketing skills. And I think this is really important for other people that want to get into security. Is sometimes we're coming from these other backgrounds that can be really, really beneficial for security, and they don't always have to be technical. So the ability to communicate, the ability to share a message, particularly, let's say, around security awareness and things like that, that's massive. You don't have to be super technical to do those things. Or again, working in strategies around understanding the organization and how it can impact the industry and looking for opportunities as the business can grow. So I think, again, sometimes there's a lot of pressure or sort of assumptions that you have to be super technical. When I speak with most people that want to break into security, it genuinely feels like 90+% of people want to be a pen tester. And the thing is, there are not enough jobs out there for pen testers. Or what I mean is, there's so many more other jobs. Yes, pen testing is one function of the industry, but there's so many more opportunities. And if anything, there are more opportunities in other areas like defensive type roles than offensive security. And I think people just need to be aware that there's some great things you can do, but especially if you utilize the knowledge and the skills you already have. Trying to get into something super technical when maybe you're not super technical is a massive leap. And I think if you take stepping stones of having that foundation that you have and using the skills and sort of playing to your strengths, that can really work well for you as well. And maybe you can create new opportunities like Chloe has, that maybe didn't exist some time ago. And then one other thing that I think is pretty helpful, and hopefully that comes through, not sure if it has. Basically, someone nearly getting crushed by a truck, but they didn't, is luck. Luck plays a really big part. And when I spoke to literally most of these people we've done the podcast with, a lot of people say luck. But I think you put yourself in a position to be lucky. So being at a conference today, you have the opportunity to go and speak to other people in the community, build relationships. You never know where these things go. You might meet your future employer, you might meet your future spouse or whatever, you never know. But also creating and taking opportunities, as in, if you have the opportunity to go on and get exposure to different environments, different countries, or different businesses, broadening out your skill sets. Sideways moves was an interesting one. So that was recommended by Craig Templeton, the CISO for REA Group. And particularly in that sort of trajectory that he was looking for and going into that leadership role, his view was broadening his awareness of an organization, how businesses operate, is actually really helpful, and not just sort of keeping to a technical or security silo. And then just putting yourself out there. So talking at conferences, talking at meetups. I know loads of people that have got jobs because they spoke at a meetup. And like, these things can be intimidating. Talking at a conference, talking at a meetup, it does not come natural for the vast majority of people. And it's one of those things that only through time and practice that you can get better. But again, you never know what comes from these things. And the worst case scenario is you could put yourself forward when you're doing a CFP, and you may get rejected. You may get advice on to say, hey, like, have you thought about this? And maybe you can do this. Or you may get accepted because you have something really interesting to share, and people would love to hear about that. So as awkward as these things are, the more you can try and put yourself out there, the more basically you have the opportunities to be lucky as well. And I think, yes, sorry, one other thing. So really interesting chat with Mubix. So Rob Fuller, he presented, I think, CityCon a couple of years back. And I was talking with him, and I was asking him around what skills have basically impacted your career the most. And I was expecting something technical, to be honest. And he said empathy, which I found really, really interesting, because this topic comes up a lot, particularly with the hiring managers and the CISOs that I'm dealing with, is empathy. And I guess some people might have it naturally. Maybe it's a learnt skill, but it's definitely something to be aware of. And I think the ability to put yourself in a position of the other person that you're trying to deal with and how you can benefit them is massive. And that can then knock on to the thing of influencing, because if you can show empathy and you're trying to make a difference to someone, then hopefully you might think about a different way of doing something. And it goes back to, like, if we say a pen tester that's doing a report, after an engagement, and a lot of roles that we have these days, consultancies want pen testers that can communicate, that can write a good report that someone non-technical is going to understand. And then if you go another step further of sort of thinking about those people that are going to make those changes, how can you really help them? And that can go for any part of the industry. So empathy, it's a great, great thing to be aware of and a really great thing to work on. And that's me. So thank you so much for having me, listening. And I really hope a thing or two maybe has been picked up along the way. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on any way you can find me.